I'm joined in the studio by Akende Chundama, chairwoman of the Zambian Socialist Party. Thanks very much for joining us in the studio here on RT. Now, do you believe we are seeing a bit of an uptick in attention that's been paid towards Africa by both the West and Russia? And if so, why?
I think we've always had significant attention on Africa by the West, Russia and China, but for different reasons. Africa is a hub for natural resources. Mm-hmm. It has always been for the West. Mm-hmm. And now Africa has multiple options. Africa doesn't have to succumb to a bad deal that we get from the Western countries. Mm-hmm. Africa has choice now. Mm-hmm. Africa now wants to be treated as equals at the table. And now Russia and China offer that to Africa. Mm-hmm. Africa and China and Russia have had a long history of friendship. And now we are able to cooperate as equal partners at the table.
How do you think that the war in Ukraine has affected the situation and the interest that the West is currently paying towards Africa? Obviously, we just saw that the Czech foreign minister is, we heard what he said, and he's also on a visit there to try and maybe gain back some of the European and Western influence there. Do you think the war in Ukraine has affected this? And do you think the West will be able to regain some of its, or increase its influence in Africa?
Definitely. We've seen an increase. Just a few months ago, we had a democracy summit in Zambia where it was basically a Western and a US-led conference to draw back cooperation with both China and Russia for the African continent. They want to always dictate to us who our friends should be, who Africa should cooperate with. And they're willing to topple governments, to assassinate our leaders for this. Mm-hmm. So the war is actually showing them that, and we're glad that Russia is standing up, because security around the world now is of utmost importance. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, apologies for interrupting you. No. Now, we see that many Western states are trying to discourage the cooperation of many African countries with China and Russia. What do you think they fear by this? And are there attempts to discourage this cooperation working?
We're moving to a multipolar world, and it's very clear that Africa now has many options. Cooperation with the West is not our only option. BRICS is opening doors for the African continent to say that even when it comes to financing, when it comes to infrastructure development, when it comes to a future for Africa, we've got different options today. So this doesn't sit well with the West. G7 sits at the table to talk down on the rest of us in the West. Mm-hmm. But with BRICS, we're seeing a different order. We're seeing a global community wanting to come together and talk as equals. Mm-hmm. So this is not sitting well with the West. It's not sitting well with the hegemony that they're used to. Mm-hmm.
Now, when you mentioned the financing of infrastructure, obviously China has invested billions in Africa. We don't know the exact sum. Now, some of the main criticism of China, again, mainly from Western countries, is the so-called Chinese debt trap, that China's given these loans at incredibly generous rates that some countries may not be able to afford to pay back, and in turn, China will gain influence there. Do you think the debt trap exists, and do you think this is what China's aiming to do in Africa?
I always say that the issue of the debt trap is laughable. Because if you look at Zambia, 70% of our foreign debt is to the Western countries, not to China. Mm-hmm. So 30% is to China. And we get the debt from China at very favorable, under very favorable conditions, at favorable interest rates. And even the period that we pay back and what we pay back is always much more favorable than from Western countries. And for Chinese debt, we've got things, tangible infrastructure that we can see where the debt is going. It's for infrastructure development. We can see hydropower stations being built. We've got roads being built. We've got schools, hospitals being built. And on top of this debt, we've got free gifts coming from China to our African countries. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with Ghana and across the African continent with Tanzania. So this debt trap is just fake news. It's Western propaganda to try and reduce Africa's cooperation with China and our friendship. But we have a long history with China. We have a long friendship with China, and that's only going to grow. Nothing is going to curb us back.
What about Russia's role on the continent now? How would you say that Russia is cooperating with Africa, and as well as Zambia specifically? What are ties like between the two countries?
Look, for Zambia and Russia, we have a long history. Russia was there when we were fighting for our independence. Russia sided with us Africans, us poor Africans at the time. We had nothing to offer Russia, but Russia came and helped us with military equipment to fight for our independence. The Western countries supported the apartheid regime in South Africa, the racist apartheid regime, I should say, and also the companies and the countries that colonized us. So we've got a long friendship and a long history with Russia. But Russia has taken a little bit of a backseat lately. But it doesn't mean that on the African continent, we've forgotten our friendship with Russia. And we'll stand by Russia. And that's why we're seeing South Africa, for example, standing up for Russia and saying we're not going to go the Western route in terms of our friendship and our history with Russia. We've got no credible history with the West.
Indeed, you mentioned South Africa there. We also heard that the US is considering imposing certain sanctions on South Africa over its alleged support of Russia in the war in Ukraine, something which, of course, the country has denied. Do you think that they'll be successful in bowing South Africa to its will and severing those relations with Russia or reducing them?
They're not going to be able to. We've got a long history, as I said. And we saw this coming. And we knew that if it wasn't going to be for this, it was going to happen in August, leading up to the BRICS summit that's supposed to happen in South Africa. South Africa is being put under immense pressure right now to arrest Putin as soon as he steps on South African soil. But we're not going to allow that to happen on the African continent. And African leaders are rising up. Yes, we do have puppet regimes here and there being funded by Western countries. Zambia, for example, has a puppet regime at the moment, funded by the West under foundations to try and hold on to Africa. But we're not going to allow this to carry on the continent. And we'll continue to support Russia. And we're grateful for South Africa taking a firm stance. And we know that it's now a multipolar world. So the US is not our only option. Russia is under sanctions. I'm here in Moscow. It's business as usual in Russia. So we're not scared.
Do you think there's a certain reluctance in the West to accept that the world is changing and many believe it is becoming much more multipolar? There are these shifting power bases. China's obviously taken a much more prominent role in international diplomacy, for example. Why do you think the West is reluctant to accept that?
When you've been considered a superpower for some time, you think that you'll remain a superpower. And you'll fight to remain a superpower. And that's what they're doing. So they thought that this honeymoon of being a superpower won't come to an end. But where people are pressed, they'll fight. And that's what's happening. And for us in Africa, we want to see a stronger Russia. We want to see a stronger China, because that gives us hope. That gives us hope of a better future for our people in Africa. We want to be able to use our resources for our own development, to take our people out of the abject poverty that we see in Africa.
Now, talking a bit more specifically about the upcoming BRICS summit in South Africa, I know you touched on this before, and there was obviously the arrest warrant by the International Criminal Court out for Vladimir Putin. Practically, how do you think this will be resolved come August? It's a tricky situation.
It's a very tricky situation. And
yeah.
For sure, I can't say how it will be resolved. But one thing that we're just proud of is that South Africa has stood up and will probably not effect that warrant. And we will continue to speak and to give South Africa hope that they are going down the right direction, not to effect that. Yes, we have leaders that are trying to say maybe President Vladimir Putin shouldn't just come to South Africa, let him attend the BRICS summit virtually. But I think it's time we stand up to the West. So we will be happy to see President Vladimir Putin in South Africa, attend the BRICS summit, and leave South Africa peacefully.
We'll certainly have to be interesting to see what happens come August. Now, the Russian Foreign Minister of Affairs, Sergei Lavrov, he recently is not held back in his criticism of the West, let's put it that way. And he says that the Western initiative to stop Russian-Africa cooperation is motivated by their desire to re-establish colonial rule in Africa. Would you say that's fair, or is it a bit harsh?
That's fair. Africa, we have not forgotten what happened in 1884 at the Berlin Conference. They divided our continent into Bantustan countries, and they want to continue to see us divided. The West doesn't want to see a united Africa, because a united Africa doesn't allow them and will not allow them to exploit us the way they do today. So it is true. They want 1884, the Berlin Conference, and those borders that they created for Africa to continue.
And to what extent would those borders that were set up back then, those artificial borders, as you say, to what extent do they fuel conflicts and unrest in the continent now?
They always say that if you want to win, divide people. Or if you want to rule, it's better that you divide people. So that's what the West continues to do. They don't want to see an Africa that is united, because an Africa that is united will be prosperous. An Africa that is united will be able to use its resources for the benefit of its people and for the benefit of the entire global community. We don't believe that African resources are just for Africa, for example. They should be used for the entire world, but in a way that is of mutual respect to each and every one of us, and that is beneficial to each and every one of us.
Well, that seems like a sufficiently positive note to end the interview on. Akende Emembe Chundama, chairwoman of the Zambian Socialist Party, thanks very much for that very in-depth discussion today here on RT. Thank you.
Thank you.